Chapter 2. Mac the werewolf was sitting on the step of my office door when I drove up Monday morning. I kept my face impassive and showed none of the surprisingly fierce satisfaction I felt. Just handed him a heavy sack of fast food breakfast sandwiches so I can get my key out and open the door. I'd been raised around wild animals. I knew how to tame them. A hearty welcome would send him off faster than harsh words if I judged him right. The food was always a good lure. Eat, I told him, and I set out for the bathroom to change into work clothes. Save me one, the rest are for you. All but one were gone when I came back. Thank you, he told me, watching my feet. You'll work it off. Come on, help me get the garage doors open. I led the way through the office and into the garage. There's nothing pending today, so we can work on my project bug. The beetle was unprepossessing at the moment, but when I was finished it would be painted, polished, and purring like a kitten. Then I'd sell it for twice what I had put into it and find another car to resurrect. I made almost half my income refurbishing old VW classics. We worked for a few hours in companionable silence when he asked to use the phone to make long-distance call. Long as it's not China, I said, coasting a boat held in place by 30 years of rust. I didn't sneak over to the office door to listen in, and I don't make a practice of eavesdropping on private conversations. I don't have to. I have very good hearing. Hello, he said, it's me. My hearing was not so good, however. I could hear the person my hearing was not so good. However, I could hear the person he was talking to. I'm fine, he said quickly. Look, I can't talk long. Pause. It's better you don't know. Pause. I know. I saw a news report. I don't remember anything after we left the dance. I don't know what killed her or why it didn't kill me. Oh no, I thought. No, look, it's better just now if you don't know where I am. And pause. I know I don't know what happened. Just that I didn't kill her. I don't know. I just want to tell Mom and Dad I'm okay. I love them and I'm looking for the ones who killed her. I have to go now. I love you too, Joe. There were a dozen stories that could account for the half of his conversation that I heard. 24. But the most prevalent of cautionary tales werewolves tell each other is what happens the first time a werewolf changes if he doesn't know what he is. In my head, I translated Mac's half of the conversation to a picture of a boy leaving a high school dance to make out with his girlfriend under the full moon, not knowing what he was. New werewolves, unless they have the guidance of a strong dominant, have little control over their wolf form the first few times they change. If Mac were a new werewolf, it'd explain why he didn't notice that I was different from the humans around. You have to be taught how to use your senses. Here in the U.S., most werewolves are brought over by friends or family. There is a support structure to educate the new wolf to keep him and everyone around him safe. But there are still occasional attacks by rogue werewolves. One of the duties of the pack is to kill those rogues and find their victims. Despite the stories, any person bitten by a werewolf doesn't turn into another werewolf. It takes an attack so vicious that the victim lies near death to allow the magic of the wolf to slip past the body's immune system, which attacks make newspapers with headlines like "Man attacked by rabid dogs." Usually the victim dies of the wounds or of the change. If he survives, then he recovers quickly, miraculously, until the next full moon, where he learns he didn't really survive at all. Not as he had been. Usually a pack will find him before his first change and ease his way into a new way of life. The packs watch the news and read the newspapers to prevent new wolf from being alone, to prevent their secrets, and to protect their secrets. Maybe no one had found Mac. Maybe he'd killed his date, and when he'd returned to human shape, he refused to believe what he had done, what he was. I've been operating under the impression that he had left his pack, but if he was a new wolf, an untaught wolf, then he was even more dangerous. I broke the rusted out bolt because I wasn't paying attention, and when Mac returned from his phone call, I was working on removing the remnant with an easy out. The world's most misnamed tool. There was nothing easy about it. I hadn't planned on saying anything to him, but the words came out anyway. I might know some people who could help you. No one can help me, he replied tiredly. Then he smiled, which would have been more convincing if his eyes hadn't been so sad. I'm all right. I set down the easy out and looked at him. Yes, I think you will be, I said, hoping I wasn't making a mistake by not pushing. I'd have to let Adam know about him before the next full moon. Just remember, I've been known to believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. His mouth perked up. Lewis Carroll. And they say the youth today aren't being educated. I said, if you trust me, you might find that my friends can help you more than you believed possible. The phone rang. I turned back to my work. Go answer the phone, please, Mac, I told him. That late in the year, it was dark out when we finished at 6. He stood and watched me as I looked up, obviously thinking about something. I deliberately fumbled with the lock to give him more time, but he didn't take advantage of it. See you tomorrow, he said instead. All right then, impulsively, I asked. Do you have a place to sleep tonight? Sure, he said with a smile, and started off as he had somewhere to be. I could have bitten off my tongue because I pushed him into a lie. Once he started lying to me, it would be harder to get him to trust me with the truth. And I don't know why it works that way, but it does, at least in my experience. I kicked myself all the way home, but by the time I had fed Medea and made myself some dinner, I figured out a way around it. I'd take him a blanket tomorrow and unlock Steven's VW bus, which was patiently awaiting brake parts from Oregon. I didn't think Stephen would mind Mac camping out for a night or two. I called Stefan to make sure because it is unwise to surprise vampires. Sure, he said without even asking who I wanted to let sleep in his van. It's all right with me, sweetheart. How long until my bus is roadworthy again? For a vampire, Stefan was all right. Parts are supposed to be in day after tomorrow, I told him. I'll call you when they get here. If you want help, we can get it done in a couple of long evenings. Otherwise, it'll take me a day. Right, he said, which was apparently goodbye because the next thing I heard was a dial tone. Well, I told the cat, I guess I'm headed out to buy a blanket. It had to be a newt blanket. Mine would smell like coyote, and a werewolf who hardly knew me wouldn't be comfortable surrounded by my scent. I spent several minutes looking for my purse before I realized I had left it locked in the safe at work. Happily, my garage was on the way to the store. Because it was dark, I parked my car on the street behind the garage where there was a street light to discourage any enterprising vandals, and I walked through the parking lot and past Stefan's bus, parked next to the office door, and gave it an affectionate pat. Stefan's bus was painted to match the mystery machine, which said a lot about the vampire it belonged to. Stefan told me that he'd briefly considered painting it black a few years ago when he started watching Buffy, but in the end he decided the Vampire Slayer was no match for Scooby-Doo. I opened the office door, but didn't bother turning on the lights because I could see pretty well in the dark. My purse was where I remembered leaving it, and I took it out and relocked the safe. Out of habit, I double-checked the heat to make sure it was set low. Everything had been turned off and put away, and was as it should have been. And I felt the usual sense of satisfaction knowing that it was mine. Well, mine and the bank's. I was smiling when I left the office and turned and locked the door behind me. I wasn't moving quietly on purpose, but being raised by a pack of werewolves makes you learn to be quieter than most. Go away, Mac's voice came from the other side of Stefan's bus. He spoke in a low, growling tone I hadn't heard from him before. I thought he was talking to me and spun around toward the sound, but all I saw was Stefan's bus. Then someone answered, Mac. Not without you. The bus had darkened windows, but I could see through them well enough to see the side door was open, framing vague, shadowy forms of Mac and one of his visitors. The second one I couldn't see. The wind was right, blowing gently past them to me, and I smelled two other people beside Mac, another werewolf and a human, and I didn't recognize either one. Although I know most of Adam's wolves by scent, it wouldn't be odd if he had gotten a new wolf without me hearing about it, but it was the human that told me something was up. I've never known Adam to send a human out with one of his wolves on business. Stranger was that no one showed any sign they knew I was around. I was quiet, but even so, both werewolves should have heard me, but neither Mac nor the other wolves appeared to notice. No, said Mac, while I hesitated. No more cages, no more drugs. They weren't helping. Cages, I thought. Someone had been keeping Mac in a cage. There was no need for that, not with Adam around. Though some alphas had to depend on bars to control new wolves, Adam wasn't one of them, nor did Mac comments about drugs make any sense. There are no drugs that work on werewolves. They were, kid. You just need to give them a chance. I promise you we can undo your curse. Undo his curse? There was no drug in the world that would undo the change, and darn few werewolves who consider their state a curse after the first few months. Eventually, most of them felt that becoming short-tempered and occasionally furry was a small price to pay for extraordinary strength, speed, and senses, not to mention the fringe benefit of a body immune to disease and old age. Even if the werewolf belonged to Adam, I doubted he knew that one of his pack were telling wild stories. At least I hope he didn't know. Max seemed to know these two, though, and I was beginning to feel his story was more complicated than I had thought. You talk like you have a choice, the third man was saying, but the only choice you have is how you get there. These weren't Adam's men. I decided the mention of curses, cages, and drugs made them the enemy. If Mac didn't want to go with them, I wouldn't let them take him. I took a quick glance around, but the streets were empty. After 6, the warehouse district is pretty dead, and I stripped out of my clothes as quietly as I could and shifted into coyote form. As a human, I didn't stand a chance against a werewolf. The coyote was still not a match, but at least I was fast, much faster than a real coyote, and just a hair quicker than a werewolf. I jumped onto the railing and vaulted from there to the top of Stefan's van for the advantage of a higher position, though I was giving up surprise. No matter how quietly I moved, a werewolf would hear the click of my nails on the metal roof. I readied myself for launch, but paused. From atop the bus, I could see Mac and these two men. None of them seemed to be aware of me. Mac had his back to me, but the others all they would have to do was look up, and they didn't. Something wasn't right. Behind the two strangers was a big black SUV, the kind of car you'd expect bad guys to drive. I don't believe there is any way to undo what you did to me, Mac was saying. You can't give me back my life, or give Meg back hers. All you can do is leave me alone. The human's hair was in a crew cut, but it was the big black gun I could see peeking out of his shoulder holster that first made me think military. Both of the strangers stood like military men. Adam had a posture too. Their shoulders were just a little stiff and their backs a little too tight. A little too straight. Maybe they did belong with Adam. The thought made me hesitate, but if I hurt one of Adam's wolves, there will be hell to pay. The moon's coming, he said the longer-haired man, the werewolf. Can't you feel it? How you're planning on surviving the winters, kid? It was the short-haired again. His voice was kindly, fatherly, patronizing even. If it gets cold around December, even in this desert. I stifled a growl as I tried to determine the best way to help Mac. I'm working here, Mac said with a gesture at the garage. If it gets colder, I think she'll help let me sleep in the garage until I find somewhere to live if I ask her. Ask her. Short-haired looked sympathetic. She kept you here for us. She's one of us, kid. How does she think we found you? Max smelled of shock first, then defeat. Emotions have a smell, but only in my coyote form is my nose good enough to distinguish more of the strongest feelings. My lips curled back over my teeth. I don't like liars, especially when they're lying about me. The werewolf's voice was dreamy. When the moon comes, you can't stop the change. He swayed back and forth. Then you can run and drink the fear of your prey before they die beneath your fangs. Moonstruck, I thought, shocked out of my anger. If this wolf was so new that he was moonstruck. He certainly wasn't Adams, and whoever had sent him was an idiot. I'm not coming, said Matt, taking a step away from them. He took another step back, putting his back against the bus. He stiffened, drew a deep breath, and looked around. Mercy? But neither of the men paid attention when Matt caught my scent. The werewolf was still held in his moon dreams, and the human was drawing his gun. We tried to do this the easy way, he said, and I could smell his pleasure. He might have tried the easy way first, but he liked the hard way better. His gun was the kind you find in the military catalog for wannabe mercenaries, where what it looks like is at least as important as how well it performs. Get in the car, kid. I'm packing silver bullets. If I shoot you, you'll be dead. He sounded like a thug from the 50s gangster movies, and I wondered if it was deliberate. If I get in the car, I'll be dead anyway, won't I? Max said slowly. Did you kill the other two who were in the cages by me? Is that why they disappeared? None of them had noticed that the werewolf was starting to change, not even the werewolf himself. I could see his eyes gleaming brightly in the darkness and the smell of musk, wolf and magic. He growled. Quiet, snapped the human. Then he looked, paused, swallowed, and turned his gun ever so slightly toward his erstwhile partner. As a human, the werewolf probably weighed in at about 200 pounds. Werewolves fully changed weigh upwards to 250 pounds. No, I don't know where the extra weight comes from. It's magic, not science. I'm a little large for the average coyote, but that meant that the werewolf is still 5 times my weight. I've been trying to figure out a way to turn my speed to advantage, but when the werewolf in his elongated jaws stretched around sharp white fangs, focused on Matt, and growled again, I knew I'd run out of time. I threw myself on top of the car and into the werewolf, who was still slowed by his ongoing change. I snapped at him to get his attention and caught his throat, still buried in the thick ruff designed to protect him from such an attack. I felt my eye teeth snag flesh, and blood spurted, pushing his heart and the increased blood pressure that accompanies the change. It wasn't a mortal wound. Werewolves heal too fast, but it should slow him down, giving me a head start while while he bound the wound. Only he didn't stop. He was hot on my heels as I dashed past Stefan's van, across the alley that allowed access to my garage bays, and leapt over the chain-link fence surrounding the Savu self-storage facility. If he'd been in full wolf form, he would have cleared the fence easier than I did, but he was hampered by his awkward shape and had to stop and tear through the fence instead. Spurred by hunting rage, he was faster than I was, even on two legs. He shouldn't have been. I've outrun my share of werewolves, and I knew I was faster than they were. But no one had told him that, and he was catching up to me. I jumped back over the fence because it had slowed him down the first time. If there had been homes nearby, the impatient, frustrated whines of the werewolf made as it was forced to stop and rip the chain link fence again, would have had the police on their way, but the nearest residencies were blocks away, and the thought reminded me that I needed to worry about innocent bystanders as well as Mac and myself. I reversed my direction, running down the road back towards the garage, intent on leading the werewolf away from town rather than into it. But before I reached the garage, my pursuer tripped and fell in the street. I thought at first that the change had taken him completely, but no, werewolf rose on all fours to continue the chase. I slowed, then stopped where I was and listened, but all I could hear was my heart pounding with fear. He was almost finished with the change, his face entirely wolf, though his fur had not yet begun to cover him. His hands, lying limply on the black top, were distorted, too thin, with an inhuman distinct distance between his fingers and his thumb. His nails were thickened to begin to come to a point at the tips, but he wasn't moving. Shaking with the need to run, I forced myself to approach him. I waited for him to jump up and grab me by the way they always do in the late-night movies, but he just lay there smelling of blood and adrenaline. A trail of liquid stretched out behind him as if he were a car that had blown a radiator hose and slung antifreeze all over the road, but the liquid that glistened under the street lamp was blood. Only then did it occur to me that I did not hear the thrum of his heart nor the whisper of his breath. I heard a car start up and took my eyes off of the werewolf in time to see the black SUV squeal out of the parking lot and turn towards me. The big car wobbled as the driver fought his speed and his turn. His headlights blinded me momentarily, but I had already seen my escape route and took it blind. He slowed a minute, as if he considered stopping by the body on the street, but then the V8 roared and the SUV picked up speed. He narrowly avoided hitting the lamp post I dodged behind. I couldn't tell if the Mac was in the car or not. I watched the SUV's taillights until it turned onto the highway and blended in with the traffic there. I walked to the werewolf just to be certain, but he was well and truly dead. I had never killed anyone before. He shouldn't have been dead. Werewolves are hard to kill. If he had bothered to stanch the wound, or if he hadn't chased me, the wound would have been healed before he could bleed it out. The taste of his blood in my mouth made me ill, and I vomited beside the body until the taste of bile overwhelmed anything else. Then I left him lying in the middle of the road and went back to the garage. I needed to check on Mac before I took on the task of dealing with the dead werewolf. To my relief, Mac was leaning on Stefan's van when I flopped into the parking lot. He held the gun loosely in his hand, the barrel bent. "Mercy?" he asked me when I approached, as if he expected me to talk. I ducked my head once and then darted around the front of the garage where I'd left my clothes. He followed me, but when I shifted back and he saw that I was naked, he turned his back to me and let me dress. I pulled down my clothing quickly. It was cold out. "I'm decent," I told him, and he faced me again. "You have blood on your chin," he said in a small voice. I wiped it off with the bottom of my t-shirt, and I wasn't going shopping tonight, so it didn't matter if I got blood on my clothes. "Don't throw up again," I told myself sternly. Pretend it was a rabbit, and it hadn't tasted like rabbit. What are you? He asked. Are you one of theirs? Where is the wolf? He's dead. We need to talk, I told him, then paused as I collected my scattered thoughts. But first we need to get a dead werewolf out of the streets, and before that, I guess we should call Adam. I led him back into the office, and this time turning on the light. Not that either of us needed it, or anything other than comfort. He put his hand on top of mine when I reached for the phone. Who is Adam and why are you calling him? He asked. I didn't fight his hold. The local alpha, we need to get the body out of the road, unless you want both of us disappeared into some federal laboratory for science to pick over a few years before they decide they can learn more from us dead than alive. Alpha, he asked. What's that? He was new. Werewolves live in packs, I told him. Each pack has an alpha, a wolf strong enough to keep the others under control. Adam Hoffman is a local alpha. What does he look like? He asked. 5'10", 180 pounds, dark hair, dark eyes. I don't think he has anything to do with your wolves, I said. If Adam wanted you, he'd have you. And he'd have found you a lot sooner. He can be a jerk, but competence is his forte. Max stared at me, his brown eyes looking yellowish in the fluorescent lighting of my office. Truth to tell, I was surprised that he was still in human form because watching one wolf change tends to encourage others. I met his gaze calmly, then dropped my eyes until I was looking at his shoulder instead. All right, he said, slowly removing his hand. You saved me tonight, and that thing could have torn you apart. I've seen them kill. I didn't ask when or whom. It was important to take action in the right order, but to avoid worse trouble. Call Adam, remove body from the middle of the street where anyone could see it, then talk. I punched Adam's number from memory. Hoffman, he answered, with just a touch of impatience on the fourth ring. I killed a werewolf at my garage, I said, and then hung up. To Max raised eyebrows, I said, that will get a faster reaction than spending 20 minutes explaining. Come on, you and I need to get the body off the street before someone spots it. When the phone rang, my answer machine picked it up. I took Stefan's bus because loading something large into a bus is just easier than loading into my little rabbit. The bus smelled of Mac, and I realized he'd not lied to me when he said he had a place to spend the night. He'd been sleeping in it for a couple nights at least. The bus was without brakes, but we fixed it, and I managed to get it to drift to a stop next to the body. Mac helped me get it in the bus and then dashed back to the garage while I drove. When I arrived, he had the garage open for me. We set the dead man on the cement floor next to the lift. Then I parked the bus back where it had been and pulled down the garage bay door, leaving us inside with the body. I walked to the corner farthest from the dead werewolf and sat down on the floor next to one of my big tool chests. Max sat down next to me and we both stared across the garage at the corpse. Half changed, the body looked even more grotesque under the harsh lighting of the second bay than it had under the street light, like something out of a black and white Lon Chaney movie. From where I sat, I could see the slice in his neck that had killed him. He was used to healing fast, I said, to break the silence, so he didn't pay attention to his wound. But some wounds take longer to heal than others. He didn't know any more than you do. How long have you been a werewolf? 2 months, Max said, leaning his head back against the tool chest and looking at the ceiling. It killed my girlfriend, but I survived, sort of. He was lucky, I thought, remembering the suppositions that I had while overhearing his phone call earlier. He hadn't killed his girlfriend after all. He probably wasn't feeling lucky enough. Lucky, though. And I wasn't going to tell him that it could be worse. Tell me about your life afterward. Where do those men come from? Are you from the Tri-Cities? I hadn't heard any suspicious deaths or disappearances in the last 6 months. He shook his head. I'm from Naperville. At my blank look, he clarified, Illinois, near Chicago. He glanced at the body, closed his eyes, and swallowed. I want to eat him, he whispered. Perfectly natural, I told him, though I'd have to admit I wanted to move away from him. Heaven save me, stuck with a new werewolf in a garage with fresh meat was not anyone's idea of safe, but we had to wait here until Adam came. It could have been worse, and I could have been near the full moon, where he could have been as hungry as he had been that first day. Deer not only tastes better, it's easier to live with afterwards, I said, then reflected that it might be better to talk about something other than food. What happened to you after the first attack? Did someone take you to the hospital? He looked at me for a moment, but I couldn't tell what he was thinking. He said, after the attack, I woke up in a cage in someone's basement. There was someone in the room when I opened my eyes, he said. Good, you'll live. Leo will be happy to see it. Wait, I said, Leo Chicago? When it came to me, Leo James. Looks as though he ought to be a Nordic skiing champion, tall, long, and blonde. Leo was one of the Chicago Alphas, and there were two of them. Leo held territory in the western suburbs. I met him once or twice. Neither of us had been impressed, but then, as I said, most werewolves don't take kindly to other predators. Mac nodded. That sounds right. He came down the stairs with the first guy and an older man. None of them would talk to me or answer any of my questions. He swallowed and gave me an anxious glance. This shit just sounds so weird, you know? Unbelievable. You're talking to someone who can turn into a coyote, I told him gently. Just tell me what you think happened. All right, he nodded slowly. All right, I was still weak and confused, but it sounded like Leo was arguing money with the third guy. It sounded to me like he sold me for $12,000. Leo sold you for $12,000, I said. As much to myself as Mac. My voice might have been a matter of fact, but only because Mac was right. It was unbelievable. Not that I thought he was lying. He had one of his wolves attack you and your girlfriend, and when you survived, he sold you to someone else as a newly turned werewolf. I think so, he said, Mac. You called your family this afternoon, I asked. I smiled at his wary look. I have a pretty good hearing. My brother, his cell phone, he swallowed. It's broken, no caller ID. I had to let them know I was alive. I guess the police think I killed Meg. You told him that you were after her killer, I said. He gave an unhappy laugh, like I could find him. He could. It was all a matter of learning how to use his new senses, but I wasn't going to tell him that, not yet. If Mac did find his attacker, chances were Mac would die. A new werewolf just doesn't stand a chance against the older ones. I patted his knee. Don't worry, as soon as we get word to the right people, and Adam is the right people. Leo's a walking dead man, and Merrick won't allow an alpha who is creating progeny and selling them for money. The Marok? Sorry, I said, like I told you, except for the occasional rogue, werewolves are organized into packs under an alpha wolf. It used to be that wasn't organized as werewolves got, but the only thing it takes to be an alpha is power, not intelligence or even common sense. In the Middle Ages, after the Black Plague, the werewolf population was almost wiped out along with real wolves because some of the alphas were indiscreet. It was decided then that there would be a leader over all the werewolves. In the U.S., all the packs followed the Marok, a title taken from the name of the one of King Arthur's knights who was a werewolf. The Marok and his pack have an oversight of all the werewolves in North America. And there are more of us, he asked. I nodded. Maybe as many as 2,000 in the U.S., 500 to 600 in Canada, and about 400 in Mexico. How do you know so much about werewolves? I was raised by them. I waited for him to ask me why, but his attention had drifted towards the body. He inhaled deeply and gave an eager shudder. Do you know what they wanted with you? I asked hurriedly. They told me they were looking for a cure. Kept putting things in my food and I could smell them. But I was hungry, so I ate anyway. Sometimes they'd give me shots. Then once I wouldn't cooperate, they used a dart gun. Outside when you were talking to them, you said that they had others like you? He nodded. They kept me in a cage in a semi-trailer. There were 4 cages in it. At first, there were 3 of us, a girl around my age and a man. The girl was pretty much out of it. She just stared and rocked back and forth. The man couldn't speak any English. It sounded like Polish to me, but it could have been Russian or something. One of the times I was taken on a trip, something they pumped in me. I woke up and I was alone. Drugs don't work on werewolves, I told him. Your metabolism is too high. These did, he said. I nodded. I believe you, but they shouldn't have. You escaped? I managed to change while they were trying to give me something else. I don't remember much about it other than running. Was the trailer here or in the Tri-Cities? I asked. He nodded. I couldn't find it again, though. I don't remember everything that happens when... And his voice trailed off. When you're the wolf. Memory came with the experience and control, or so I'd been told. A strange car approached the garage with a quiet purr common to expensive engines. What's wrong? He asked when I stood up. Don't you hear the car? He started to shake his head and then paused. Yes, I do. There are advantages to being a werewolf, I said. One of them is being able to hear and smell better than the average Joe. I stood up. It's turning into the parking lot. I'm going to go look out and see who it is. Maybe it's the guy you called the Alpha? I shook my head. That's not his car.